It was about a Mossad spy back in the 60s.
Yeah.
Back in the 60s, right? Anyway, he infiltrated the Syrian government, this guy. And it was a pretty good documentary sort of TV show. And right at the end, they found out who he was. He had a public hanging. And then they made it sound like the Syrians were really bad because they weren't, to this day, they haven't sent his bones back to them. But these people were at war with each other. Yeah. I mean, come on, man. It's like, I don't know, Japanese soldiers or something.
Plus, you got to have a bit of bargaining power. If you gave back all the bones, then they'd be like, "Oh, you're soft. You'd have no bargaining power." Do you know what I mean? Because you're a political conflict with the country, you can refuse to give the bones back as a bit of leverage to negotiate other stuff, couldn't you? You know what I mean? Yeah, it's probably biased. I mean, can you imagine if you made a documentary sympathising with ISIS? You'd get probably raided. Do you know what I mean? Like if you did, like if you, let's say you tried to make an intellectual argument to sympathise with certain points, you'd get raided. Like you would, and it would be banned. It would be considered like pro-terrorist.
So do you sympathise with ISIS?
No. For the record. What's that? Did ya? Just polished your fucking tank and... Yep. Two guys a cup in a tank.
Like I've got to be careful with what I say out here.
Well, that's what I mean. Like, these things only work if you speak about natural topics that you're interested in. But because we can't go completely incorrect and rip on feminism, then what else is there to talk about?
Well, we can rip off feminism in a measured way, I think. I mean, you know, as long as you're not abusive and you come across as misogynistic, I think it's fine.
Yeah, but
I think that feminism is a crock of shit.
But knowing modern YouTube, they'd probably ban you saying that it was hate speech, even though you're just making critical analysis.
Yeah, true.
Because they're starting to get rid of those channels now. You can still do it, but they're starting to pull the screws.
Jeez, man, I mean, free speech. Come on, free speech is everything. If you don't have free speech, you don't have a democracy. So how the fuck are we going to function as a society? How can you say, if you've got a few comments about something as I don't know, simple and non-threatening as feminism, how can you define that as hate speech? I don't get it. You reckon they can extrapolate to that level?
Well, because they can use the same logic of racism. So if you made critical remarks about race, they can say that's hate speech, even though you might be well substantiated with statistics. You know what I mean? That's the way they say. They say that it's...
But you see, what is racism? If you're commenting about another race that has certain traits, is that racism?
Well, that's what I'm saying. They would claim that's hate speech, even though you're just critiquing it. So I'd use that as a way to silence you.
Critiquing, I mean, where do you draw the line? I mean, you have to critique. Well, what's the point of having races then? Well, we're all just the same, but we're not.
No. We're all different when it comes to positive stuff. But any of the ugly stuff, we're all the same. Oh, except for white males. Because if you're white, then we can focus on the ills about your traits.
Oh, of course. Well, they're the softest target going around, aren't they, these days?
Well, it's don't say anything negative. You can outline the differences that are benign, and feel free to be critical of all the ugliness, as long as they're white and male. But don't criticise white females. But if you're white and male, go nuts with all the else, you know. Yeah, that's pretty much it. But don't don't make critical points about Mexicans. Only John Smith, who works 9 to 5 in his executive position.
That's right, because he's obviously an evil man, that guy. He has to be evil. I mean, if you've got power and influence and money, you're automatically evil. That's how it works, isn't it?
Pretty much.
If life was that simple, we'd all be enlightened by now.
Yeah. Okay, so what is it exactly you like about U2?
I think U2 are probably one of the greatest bands ever.
And why? Please elaborate. Please elaborate.
Please elaborate. Well, Bono. Or Bono? Yeah. Bono?
Bono.
Yeah, Bono.
Bono.
Bono. He was just a multi-talented man, you know? And those glasses that he wore, fuck. That's what made the band, really. He was just cool and, you know, yeah, happening dude.
Down to earth, non-egotistical, very humble.
Oh, completely non-egotistical, completely enlightened.
So name something your mum... Tell me something your mum doesn't know.
Well, I do give it a...
I can get cacked every fucking night. Yeah, sorry, Mum, I do cocaine. You seen that before? It's exactly like that. So, and the dog, it couldn't see out the window, could it? It could only run around the ground.
Yes, that was his existence. It was like about 2 or 3 square meters. That was it for like 10 hours at a day. But I did spend a night with this girl, so it was more like 24 hours.
Tell me why, when males do yoga and females do yoga, why is it that men generally hit a higher level of enlightenment?
Well, as a general rule, females do find yoga a much easier thing to do, practice to do. You could argue that women are naturally more enlightened than men, but I guess the few guys that persevere, because they've got a bigger gap to fill, I suppose, they do tend to know a lot more and cover a lot more bases, and they tend to be better teachers. Yeah.
So saying men have deeper spiritual experiences throughout their life, which allows them.
I think men generally are less spiritual than women, by definition, and I guess women, well, guys that do go on the spiritual path have to try a lot harder. And as a result, they become a lot more versed in spiritual practices, I find.
Could it also be, and I'm not obviously putting words in your mouth at all, could it also be because women, I guess you could argue maybe, one might speculate, or make the conjecture, potentially, that women are, as you put it previously, a simpler being intellectually than I'm joking. Just don't think as deeply.
Well, I mean, as a general rule, I do think that men tend to think a lot more than women. That doesn't mean that men are more complex or women are simpler. I just think that men tend to think a lot more because we internalise our problems a lot more. We don't discuss, our problems with our friends, and when girls get together and they bounce off each other. Guys don't really do that. Guys are more into their look at fucking the size of my cock and that sort of bullshit. We talk shit in a different way.
Do you think there's very many women that get out when they catch up talk about Mexican boxing?
Yeah, no, I don't. Or anything really specialised in general. Women don't really go down the specialised route of thinking and whatnot. And the problem with guys is that we use our specialised way of thinking and our deep thinking, so to speak, with our everyday social problems. And that's why you've got so many autistic type blokes, I think. So they're trying to apply complex way of thinking to really non-complex social everyday things. Like, for instance, I don't know, why does my mum abuse me? when I was a kid, and then they go down that rabbit hole far too much in a thinking kind of way, not so much emotional, and then they will never understand it because there's nothing to understand about something as simple as that. I mean, a lot of social things can be worked out by just moving on and just talking shit. I suppose you just I don't know create a different way of thinking about it in that moment. If you're talking shit with someone, actually, kind of like what we're doing right now in a way. Yeah. So, but I think guys they internalise their issues far too much, and it's that's why we've got so many young men that are lost and don't know what the fuck's going on. Yeah, I don't know. That's just a thought I've got. What do you think?
I think that U2's second album was probably their most eclectic, and Bono really came into his own both artistically. Have you heard Hugh Lewis in the news? I feel they really came into both artistically and commercially.
I mean, what about that?
Because it's not just a statement about the band itself, but it's a statement. Hey, Paul. Oh, fucking, where's your fucking reservation at Darcy now, you motherfucker? Yeah, American Psycho.
Oh, shit.
Hey, Paul. He starts putting the guitar on. Why is there plastic all over the couch? You got a little chow or something? What specifically do you like about 80s metal? Zero.
The hairstyles. I mean, how much fun did those guys have?
I think what I dislike so much about 80s metal is the chord progression and the storyline of the music is so predictable. It's like what you could come up with in 2 seconds, and there's no artistic depth to it.
That wasn't just metal. That was the 80s in general.
But I think a lot of 80s music have a bit of depth to it, like Total Eclipse of the Heart and all that shit. What's that? Bonnie Tyler or something. All that, there's depth to it, but I find 80s metal is just very predictable chord progression.
If you look at Metallica's metal, like their original metal, they became more predictable later. They
became almost cheesy. I thought a lot of Metallica shit.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of original Metallica fans after when they did Enter Sandman and all that, they got put off by the band back then. Yeah, I remember a few guys, old mates of mine, that were full on staunch metal heads, and they didn't like where the band went. Yeah. They got too commercial. Yeah. So.
And they were maybe trying too hard, and so it to repeat what they did previously. But
I reckon it just became business, to be honest. Yeah. I've seen some of their documentaries. They're they got shrinks, they got massage therapists, life coaches, everything, all that sort of stuff. So it's just a money making machine now. So they worked it out young enough, and they were smart enough, and sort of went with it.
And what specifically do you dislike about European cars?
What is there to like? I mean, when you think about bikes, right? You got Japanese bikes; their engineering's really good. It's all good quality. If something breaks down, it doesn't cost you fucking the amount of the cost of the bike for buying it. Italian bikes, like your Dukes and all that sort of stuff, they break down. They cost a fortune, and they break down more often. So that's the problem with Italian and European stuff. French cars as well are notorious for that. Yeah. So.
Would you ever buy a Fiat?
A Fiat?
Fiat.
I think they're Russian. That's right. The Italians were in conjunction with the Russians or the Soviets back in the day. So would you buy something that's sort of Soviet linked? I don't know.
Probably in this day and age it'd be fine, wouldn't it?
I don't know. I mean, there's no Soviet real era. Are we talking Russian now? I don't know. We don't really have Russian cars or anything.
It's more the Hawaii phones that they reckon install the listening devices so the Chinese government can spy on Australia.
Well, the theory about anything that's Americans, it's okay for the American government to do it, but no, it's not okay for the Chinese.
It's the same as nuclear weapons, isn't it? It's like they don't let most nations have nuclear weapons, but America has hundreds of thousands of them. Yeah.
But having said that, they do hold the balance of power. So we're living, considering all the potential for nuclear war and whatnot that we've got, and they do hold a balance of power. We haven't really exterminated it.
I reckon they have unofficial agreements behind closed doors where they've said if this escalates, don't hit our aircraft carriers under any circumstances unless you contact us first. Don't preemptively launch nuclear weapons unless you negotiate with us first. And don't allow your nuclear weapons to be falling into the hands of terrorists. So that I reckon they've got rules of engagement with the other governments. We say, yep, we'll send out thousands of people. Who cares if they get slaughtered on the ground? That's fine. You'll get casualties. We'll get casualties. Hitting military installations, not near the government buildings with helicopters and planes is fine. But don't launch any nuclear weapons unless you contact us first, and don't hit any of our aircraft carriers. You know what I mean? So I reckon they wouldn't tell the public that, because then they'd say, okay, they're already negotiating, so how come they can't negotiate?
How would they govern something like that?
Easily, because you think about it, they've got diplomats in a direct line. If they contacted, say, I'm just trying to think of who's a government that America's at war with or constantly at conflict, like Russia, for instance, right? You don't think a diplomat or the president, some smart guys there, is contacting Vladimir Putin going, look, at the end of the day, we can have dogfights with your fighter jets in Syria, and we'll see who comes out on top. We'll make money for our side, make money for your side with the defence contractors and everything. But at the end of the day, don't fire any nuclear warheads, obviously, because we'll fire them back. That's a given, yeah? Oh, obviously, that's in place. And they'll probably on top of that say things like, don't hit our aircraft carriers. So, but we'll send as many people in as possible to play a game, because it's like a computer game for us, because they're not our children. We'll just send them out. So you'll get casualties, we'll get casualties, but at the end of the day, we're making money for the gun manufacturers. But obviously, don't do anything stupid like launch missiles from a nuclear silo.
That makes complete sense, and I suppose the other point is that we live in a hierarchical world. So in America, you're not going to get politicians and corporate leaders' kids going to war. So there's an underclass in America, say for instance, and that exists in all countries. So that happens in Russia. I'm sure there's a big hierarchy. If you've met Russians, you probably sort of feel it anyway. Obviously it happens. I mean, a good example is the Turkmens and the Kurds, or the tribes that skirmishes, I suppose, that happened recently. It wasn't Turks from Istanbul and rich people that own construction companies and all that sort of stuff. It was the local tribes that had to go in and fight against, I guess you could argue, the local tribes of the Kurds, which they are anyway, because they're pretty poor and whatnot. So there's all these layers within all these cultures. So as long as the man doesn't have to put his own sort of, kids and himself at risk, well, he doesn't care. He's going to make money from, the weapons and from financing this crap and all that. So it'll just keep going.
That's what I'm saying. There's under the table rules of engagement that they send memos across. Because if you notice if you really wanted to, you could take out a Russian government building, but they don't, because they know that would just escalate it. So they've got rules like don't hit aircraft carriers, don't fire one nuclear weapon, because if that escalated, like with the amount of nuclear weapons those guys have, if they fired them all at once, you think most of them would get through? Most of them would get through and hit capitals. You couldn't stop them all. If they've got 100,000 or 500,000 nuclear warheads and they fired them all, ballistic missiles, they're not going to be able to intercept and get rid of them all. Some will land. But they know that they'll fire them back. So what they'll also say is you need to share intelligence with us, and we'll share intelligence with you as well on if terrorists are trying to get their hands on your nuclear weapons. You see what I mean? Because they know it would get out of hand. But as far as the ground troops and shit, go nuts, because we don't care. It's population control for us. We'll play a little war game. Sometimes we'll win land, sometimes you'll get land. But at the end of the day, the defence contractors and the guns manufacturers and the tanks manufacturers, they're all making a fuckload of money. So we'll keep the war game going, make money for us, but don't do something stupid like take out one of our aircraft carriers. Because you notice how they never get hit? If you really wanted to take out an aircraft carrier, you could. You just do all your manpower on the one thing. Like, if they sent all their manpower, like subs, fucking shitload of helicopters, fuckload of bombers, you could take one out. But notice how they never get hit?
Are they not getting hit because they've got really good missile systems on there, or?
No, I'm saying if you really wanted to take one out, you'd send such a barrage that some would get through. Same as if you wanted to take out a capital city, you would fire enough nuclear warheads, and also don't forget you could send enough bombers in where some would get through and you could drop it. You could do it, but they're not that stupid because they know, okay, then you're starting a nuclear winter.
Yeah, I guess it's a theory of the balancing power in general. I mean, if you did hit an American aircraft carrier, the consequences, the Americans would retaliate in absolute force. You'd be fucked. So let's say they did that in the first or second Iraq War, and Hussein did that to one of the carriers. They've probably got like an unwritten rule, like, or a rule. It could be a clandestine rule that they've got that if you do that, we'll raise like a quarter of Baghdad or some shit like that. It'd be very possible. Anyway.
On those countries that they know might do it, like real rogue ones, which I don't think there is really that many rogue ones. I reckon they're all negotiating with the American government on some level. Even North Korea, I reckon it's all just theatre. I reckon on some level they send memos back. Because it's so easy. All you do is you send an email to the diplomat and say, look, here's the thing. Have your little war games with South Korea and economic trade wars and all that shit. That's cool. But just so you know, if you did launch that missile, we'll just level your whole country. Can you please just send back confirmation that Kim Jong-il acknowledges this? Yep, confirmed. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I wonder if there's a whole culture out there, like an international community of diplomats and all that are aware of these unwritten rules or written rules. Kind of like the media in the West. Like there isn't an obvious propaganda machine, but there's propaganda within our media. So there's all these unwritten rules, I suppose, that helps self-govern everything. So maybe there's an international community out there that knows about all these certain rules, and they're really well versed, and in order to step up or get to those power positions, you have to be really well versed, and you're vetted, and it's all managed, and it's all a power play that's managed really well.
But that's what local politics is as well. Well, not local, but national politics. Definitely, you've got the two parties, but then I reckon you've got under the table higher group, elite group there, or outside of the official political system, or just on the very top, like the very top, and they're going, okay, look, let's debate this bit publicly. Let's see if we can win this legislation. But at the end of the day, these are the non-negotiables. And no matter what happens, we can't let this get through. For example, things like lowering tax too much, or certain, I don't know. Yeah. 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 No. Yeah. Because if you really wanted to solve a lot of problems, you could, but they don't let it get solved. Do you know what I mean? Poverty easily, you could solve that, international poverty. But also, where's most of the poverty in our country? Oh, I mean international poverty. Like if you really gave a shit about solving poverty in Africa, they have the technology, the resource, and everything to go and solve that. You wouldn't have any problem, but they probably know on some level, why would they? They sort of want that problem to exist anyway because it's sort of distracting people. You know what I mean?
Africa's very resource rich, and there's big companies, European companies, that profit so much of having all that turmoil because then they can control it. I mean, if you gave power to the local people there, then these corporations that go in there and exploit all this wealth won't have nearly as much profit from all that because the people will demand more. It's as simple as that. That's why democracy is such a good system, because it gives people a voice on some level, and that's why it's so important that I believe that the way our world is going, where there's less democracy, people sort of have to work out ways and put systems in place within all these new control measures that everyone's putting in place. For instance, like the European Union. All right, they're not allowing the Brits to leave, and I don't think the Brits were ever going to leave the EU. They were there from the start. They need their money. How are they going to leave? And but within that, you can still, I don't know, maybe create some democratic functions within that. I don't know how you do it. I mean, I'm not a freaking political person or anything. I'm not a political scientist or anything. But there's got to be a ways of allowing people, the average person, to have some kind of a voice. Because in Australia, for instance, every 3 years we get to vote federal elections, and you could argue and say, well, how much power does the average person have? Probably not that much, but we do have something. It's a lot better than living in, I don't know, a freaking fascist country like Germany in World War II, for instance. We've got we're streets ahead. So, yeah, I think that's important.
I think the only way this conversation would get more pretentious is if we did it in French.
Merci beaucoup, mademoiselle. Yeah.
Oh, you're one of those type.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I'll have to go back and have a wank. Oh.
You motherfucker.